Welcome to a story of two giants, a global dance floor and a whole lot of tariffs. This is the story of the US-China trade war, a tale of economic rivalry, political maneuvering, and consequences that rippled across the world. Forget dry economics lectures. We're diving into a narrative that's as captivating as it is crucial to understanding our interconnected world. Our main characters? Uncle Sam, representing the United States, a nation known for its consumer appetite and a history of championing free trade, with a few protectionist tendencies thrown in. And facing him, Brother Dragon, representing China, the rising economic powerhouse, the factory of the world, with a unique blend of state-guided capitalism and global ambition. For years, these two were partners in a global economic dance, a seemingly beneficial partnership. Cheap goods flowed from China to the US, fueling American consumerism and Chinese growth. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. A growing trade imbalance, accusations of unfair practices, and a simmering sense of rivalry. Then, the music changed. A new leader in the US with a very different approach to trade decided it was time to change the steps. The tariff tango began, a series of escalating moves, each side responding to the other, with consequences felt far beyond their borders. In this video, we'll unpack this epic saga. We'll explore the why behind the fight, the motivations, the grievances, the long simmering tensions. We'll follow the moves, the tariffs, the retaliations, the strategic maneuvers, and we'll witness the consequences, the economic impacts, the shifting global landscape, and the uncertain future. Get ready for a story that's packed with drama, intrigue, and surprisingly, a few moments of unintentional comedy. It's a story that will not only illuminate a crucial chapter in recent history, but also sharpen your understanding of global economics and politics, all while boosting your English skills along the way. The trade love-hate story of Uncle Sam and Brother Dragon, a tariff tango that keeps on dancing. Once upon a time, across the vast shimmering Pacific Ocean, resided two imposing figures. On one shore stood Uncle Sam, the United States, a nation renowned for its consumerist appetite, its innovative spirit, and a historical penchant for free trade, though with occasional bouts of protectionist fever. On the other shore, Brother Dragon, China, emerged as a manufacturing powerhouse rapidly ascending the economic ladder with a blend of state-guided capitalism and export-driven growth. Their relationship for years was a complex mix of cooperation and competition. They were like two dance partners in a globalized economy, sometimes stepping on each other's toes, sometimes gracefully gliding together. Uncle Sam enjoyed the cheap goods flowing from Brother Dragon's factories, keeping inflation low and consumers happy. Brother Dragon, in turn, amassed vast foreign exchange reserves and lifted millions out of poverty through this trade relationship. It seemed like a win-win, until it wasn't. The seeds of discord, a growing imbalance, the sunshine and rainbows, period was built on an increasingly lopsided foundation. The trade deficit, the difference between what Uncle Sam bought from Brother Dragon and what he sold, grew exponentially. While economists debated the significance of trade deficits, some arguing they are a natural consequence of globalized supply chains, others viewing them as a sign of economic weakness, the sheer size of the US-China trade imbalance became politically charged. Beyond the numbers, a sense of unease grew within Uncle Sam's borders. Manufacturers complained about unfair competition from Chinese companies, allegedly benefiting from state subsidies, lax labor laws, and a manipulated currency. Intellectual property theft became a major sticking point. American companies reported losing billions of dollars due to counterfeit goods and the forced transfer of technology, essentially having to hand over the secret recipe to do business in China. These grievances simmered for years, largely ignored during periods of strong economic growth. Previous administrations, while acknowledging the issues, favored a more diplomatic and multilateral approach, working through the World Trade Organization, WTO, and engaging in strategic dialogues. But the feeling that China was gaming the system and not playing by the rules persisted, particularly among certain segments of the American population and political landscape. Act 1. The trumpet sounds. A new sheriff in town. Enter Donald Trump, the real estate mogul turned reality, TV star turned president. His America First doctrine was a stark departure from the established foreign policy consensus. He viewed the global trade system, particularly the relationship with China, as a zero-sum game where the U.S. was consistently losing. He promised to bring back jobs and make America great again, often by targeting China's trade practices. Trump's election was, in part, a reflection of the anxieties and frustrations of those who felt left behind by globalization, the factory, workers who lost their jobs, the small businesses struggling to compete. He tapped into a vein of economic nationalism and protectionist sentiment that had been brewing beneath the surface. Act 2. The Tariff Tango begins. A dance of escalation, 2017-2018. The provocation and initial skirmishes. The first act of this trade drama was a carefully choreographed series of moves. In August 2017, Robert Lighthizer, Trump's trade representative, our trade wizard, launched an investigation under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. This was the legal justification, a somewhat dusty, rarely used tool from a bygone era of trade disputes, to probe China's alleged unfair trade practices. The Section 301 investigation focused on three main areas: forced technology transfer, the accusation that American companies were compelled to share their technology with Chinese partners as a condition of market access. This wasn't always explicit, but often came in the form of subtle pressure, joint venture requirements, and opaque regulatory hurdles. Intellectual property theft. The widespread and systematic theft of American trade secrets, designs, and patents. This ranged from outright cyber espionage to the production of counterfeit goods. Non-market economic practices. The complaint that China's state-led economic model, with its heavy subsidies to domestic industries, created an uneven playing field. Initiatives like Made in China 2025, a plan to dominate key high-tech sectors, were seen as particularly threatening. In March 2018, the USTR report confirmed these accusations, paving the way for tariffs. Trump, true to form, announced his intention to impose tariffs on up to $60 billion worth of Chinese goods. This was the opening salvo, a shot across the bow. In April 2018, the U.S. released the specific list, 1,333 products, a seemingly random assortment designed to inflict maximum pain on China while minimizing the impact on American consumers. a tricky balancing act. Brother Dragon predictably vowed to retaliate in kind. The game of chicken had begun, 2018 to 2019. The dance intensifies round and round. They go, this period was a whirlwind of escalating tariffs, like a dance that spiraled out of control. July 6, 2018, the first real punches were thrown. The U.S. imposed tariffs on $34 billion worth of Chinese goods, primarily targeting industrial machinery and components. China immediately retaliated with tariffs on an equivalent value of U.S. goods, including soybeans, a crucial export for American farmers, a politically sensitive move. August 2018, another round. $16 billion more in tariffs from each side. The focus remained on industrial goods, but the net was widening. September 2018, the big one. The U.S. announced tariffs on a whopping $200 billion worth of Chinese goods, initially at 10%, with the threat of raising them to 25% later. This was a significant escalation, encompassing a vast range of consumer products. China responded with tariffs on $60 billion of U.S. imports. May 2019. The threat became reality. The U.S. raised the tariffs on the $200 billion tranche from 10% to 25%. The pain was intensifying. August 2019, Trump announced tariffs on another $300 billion of Chinese goods, effectively covering almost all remaining imports. China, running out of U.S. goods to target, retaliated with a mix of tariffs and other measures like devaluing its currency, making Chinese exports cheaper and U.S. exports more expensive. This phase wasn't just about tariffs. It was a broader economic and technological conflict. The U.S. placed Huawei, the Chinese telecom giant, on an entity list restricting its access to American technology. This was a significant blow to Huawei's global ambitions and fueled concerns about the decoupling of the U.S. and Chinese tech sectors. The motivation here transcended pure trade. It reflected national security concerns about China's growing technological prowess and its potential use for surveillance and espionage. Act 3, the Phase 1 Truce, a Fragile Peace 2020, a pause, not a resolution. After months of escalating tensions and mounting economic damage, both sides blinked. In January 2020, the U.S. and China signed the Phase 1 trade deal. This was at best a partial and temporary truce. The key provisions of the deal included Chinese purchase commitments. China pledged to buy an additional $200 billion worth of U.S. goods and services over 2 years across various sectors: agriculture, manufacturing, energy. This was a significant commitment aimed at reducing the trade deficit. Intellectual property protections. China made some rather vague promises to strengthen intellectual property protection and address forced technology transfer. Currency manipulation. The deal included a commitment to avoid competitive currency devaluation. Tariff rollback. Limited. The U.S. agreed to reduce some of the recently imposed tariffs, but the vast majority remained in place. The Phase 1 deal was met with mixed reactions. Some hailed it as a victory for Trump's hardball tactics, while others criticized it as a superficial agreement that failed to address the core structural issues. Many observers noted that China's purchase commitments were unrealistic and that the enforcement mechanisms were weak. It was, as some quipped, more of a ceasefire than a peace treaty. Act 4, the pandemic and the return of the tango 2020-2021 and beyond, interrupted, then resumed. The COVID-19 pandemic threw a wrench into the works. Global trade plummeted, supply chains were disrupted, and the US-China relationship deteriorated further. The pandemic became another point of contention, with accusations and counter-accusations about the origin and handling of the virus. The Biden administration, while adopting a less confrontational tone than Trump, largely maintained the existing tariffs and continued to view China as a strategic competitor. The focus shifted somewhat from a purely bilateral trade war to a broader competition for technological and economic dominance. Hypothetical 2025. The Trump Tango Round 2? The provided text outlines a hypothetical scenario of a second Trump term, and it's a doozy. It paints a picture of a rapid return to aggressive trade policies, but with even higher stakes and broader implications. January 2025. The trade agenda is set, and tariffs are back in the spotlight. It's not just about China anymore. Canada and Mexico are also in the crosshairs. February 1st, 2025. Tariffs are imposed, citing fentanyl and immigration concerns, a clear indication that trade is being weaponized for broader political goals. The initial 10% on China is just the appetizer. February 4th, 2025. The 10% tariff takes effect, and China predictably retaliates. The dance begins again, but this time the music is faster and the steps are more aggressive. March 4th, 2025. Boom. Tariffs on all Chinese imports jump to 20%. This is a major escalation, signaling a willingness to endure significant economic pain to achieve what exactly? March 10th, 2025. China hits back, targeting American agriculture again. The farmers are caught in the crossfire, pawns in a larger geopolitical game. This hypothetical scenario highlights several key points. The persistence of the underlying tensions. The trade war isn't just about Trump. It reflects deeper structural issues and strategic competition between the US and China. The weaponization of trade. Trade is increasingly being used as a tool to achieve non-economic goals, such as addressing immigration or combating drug trafficking. This is a dangerous trend, as it undermines the rules-based international trading system. The potential for decoupling. The escalating tariffs and technological restrictions raise the specter of a decoupling of the US and Chinese economies, a separation that could have profound consequences for global growth and stability. The impact on global order. The actions, even hypothetical, have broader implications beyond the two players, affecting global trade norms, supply chains, and international relations. The enduring questions. The US-China trade war, whether in its actual or hypothetical forms, raises fundamental questions. Can the world's two largest economies coexist peacefully, or are they destined for a protracted period of conflict? Is globalization in retreat, or will it simply evolve into a new, more fragmented form? What is the future of the international trading system, and can the WTO be reformed to address the challenges of the 21st century? What role will technology play? Will it be the battleground for dominance, or a bridge that can be used for better relations? How much economic pain are countries willing to endure to achieve their political and strategic goals? The tariff tango between Uncle Sam and Brother Dragon is far from over. It's a complex, multi-layered dance with no easy answers, and its steps will continue to shape the global landscape for years to come. The audience, the rest of the world, watches with a mix of fascination and trepidation, hoping the dancers don't trample everyone else in the process. The music plays on and the dance continues. The trade love-hate story of Uncle Sam and Brother Dragon, a tariff tango, the why behind the dance, the story version. So we've seen Uncle Sam and Brother Dragon engaged in their elaborate and increasingly aggressive tariff tango. We've witnessed the steps, the spins, and the near collisions. But what was really driving Uncle Sam's moves? What was the inner monologue, the reasoning behind the seemingly erratic choreography? Let's peek behind the curtain, shall we? Uncle Sam's inner monologue. A symphony of grievances. Imagine Uncle Sam, sitting in his armchair, a half-eaten apple pie on the table, watching the news. He sees reports of closed factories, unemployed workers, and that ever-growing trade deficit number flashing on the screen. He grumbles, "This just ain't right." His internal monologue goes something like this: the trade deficit blues, that darn trade deficit. It's like watching my bank account drain away dollar by dollar. Every time I buy something made in China, it feels like I'm losing. Brother Dragon is getting rich, and I'm getting a lot of cheap stuff, but I'm also getting sinking feeling in my gut. This has to stop. I need to make him buy more of my stuff. Maybe if I make his goods more expensive, people will buy American again. It's like a diet. Less Chinese takeout, more American apple pie. The intellectual property heist. And it's not just the cheap stuff. They're stealing my best ideas, my blueprints, my software, my secret recipes. It's like they're sneaking into my workshop at night and copying everything. How am I supposed to compete when they're playing with my playbook? I need to lock the door, install a security system, and maybe even give them a good talking to, with a lawyer present, of course. This was more than annoyance. This felt like a violation, the forced confession. And then there's this whole forced technology transfer business. It's like they're saying, if you want to dance with me, you have to teach me all your best moves. It's not a fair trade. I'm sharing my secrets, and they're using them to become my biggest competitor. That's not partnership. That's highway robbery. This was about power and control, not just profits, the uneven playing field. And don't even get me started on the subsidies. Brother Dragon is giving his companies all sorts of unfair advantages, cheap loans, tax breaks, you name it. It's like he's playing the game with loaded dice. How am I supposed to compete with that? I need to level the playing field, or maybe even tilt it a little bit in my favor. The sense of injustice was palpable, the national security card. And now they tell me it's a matter of national security. Fentanyl coming across the border, illegal immigrants. It's all connected somehow. Maybe if I put tariffs on everything, I can solve all these problems at once. It's like using a hammer to fix everything, even if it's a leaky faucet. This was where the trade war started to morph into something bigger, a tool for addressing a wider range of anxieties, the jobs, jobs, jobs mantra. I promised to bring back the jobs. Those factories in the Rust Belt, they need to be humming again. If I make Chinese goods more expensive, maybe, just maybe, people will start buying American again, and those factories will reopen. It's a gamble, but I have to do something. This was the political heart of the matter, the promise that resonated with a key segment of the electorate. Fairness, the fuzzy feeling. Above all, it just doesn't feel fair. I'm playing by the rules and Brother Dragon is, well, he's bending them, breaking them, maybe even rewriting them. I need to restore some balance, some sense of fairness to this whole relationship. It's not about winning, it's about getting a fair shake. This was the emotional core, the gut feeling that drove much of the policy. It wasn't always logical, but it was powerful. The Trumpian translation, from grumbles to action, these internal grumbles, these anxieties and frustrations, were translated into policy through the unique lens of Donald Trump. He took these complex issues and simplified them, sometimes to the point of oversimplification. The trade love-hate story of Uncle Sam and Brother Dragon, a tariff tango, the widening gyres. The tariff tango continued, the dance floor got bigger, and the moves became more extravagant. It wasn't just a little two-step anymore. It was a full-blown, room-spanning, furniture-smashing kind of dance. Uncle Sam's expanding arsenal, from surgical strikes to carpet bombing. Remember those initial tariffs? They were like carefully aimed darts targeting specific products. But as the dance went on, Uncle Sam started using a bigger weapon, a tariff shotgun. Section 301, the workhorse. These tariffs, based on the Unfair Trade Practices investigation, were the main tool. They started with high-tech goods, expanded to more industrial products, then broadened to encompass a vast range of consumer goods. It was like going from targeting specific muscles to just flailing wildly. The goal was to inflict enough pain on Brother Dragon that he'd cry, "Uncle," Sam, that is. From specific to sweeping, the Section 301 tariffs eventually covered the majority of goods imported from China. We're talking everything from toys and clothes to electronics and machinery. The rates varied, from 10% to 25%, adding a significant cost to these products. Imagine going to the store and finding that everything made in China suddenly cost 10 to 25% more. Ouch! EPA. The nuclear option, 2025. In our hypothetical future, Trump 2.0 pulls out the big guns. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, is like a legal nuclear option for trade. It allows the president to declare a national emergency and impose sweeping restrictions on trade. In this scenario, the emergency is fentanyl and immigration, a rather creative interpretation of the law. This leads to tariffs on all Chinese goods, initially at 10%, then quickly jumping to 20%. This is no longer a targeted strike. It's carpet bombing the entire trading relationship. Section 232, Steel and Aluminum Collateral Damage. These tariffs, ostensibly about national security, were applied globally, not just to China. While China wasn't a major exporter of steel and aluminum to the US, these tariffs added to the overall tension and contributed to the perception of a broader trade war. It was like throwing a punch that missed the main target, but still hit a bystander, the tech focus. Beyond the broad tariffs, there was a specific focus on high-tech sectors. Semiconductors, electric vehicles, and other strategic industries saw increased tariffs, reflecting the underlying battle for technological dominance. This wasn't just about trade. It was about the future of economic and military power. It's the high-stakes poker game within the larger brawl. Brother Dragon's retaliation. hitting where it hurts. Brother Dragon wasn't going to just stand there and take it. He retaliated tit for tat with his own tariffs on American goods. He was like a skilled martial artist, deflecting blows and counterattacking. With precision. The soybean strategy. China's retaliatory tariffs focused heavily on agricultural products, particularly soybeans. This was a strategic move. Soybeans are a major U.S. export, and American farmers are a key political constituency for Trump. Hitting the farmers was like hitting Uncle Sam where it hurt in his political heartland. It was a calculated move designed to create domestic pressure on Trump to back down. Beyond tariffs, the non-tariff arsenal. China didn't just rely on tariffs. It had other weapons in its arsenal. Antitrust investigations. Chinese regulators launched antitrust probes against American companies like Google, creating headaches and uncertainty. Unreliable entity list. This was a blacklist of foreign companies deemed to be harming Chinese interests. It was a threat, a warning to American businesses to tread carefully. Export controls. China started to flex its muscles on exports of critical materials like rare earth minerals, essential for many high-tech products. This was a reminder that China controlled key parts of the global supply chain, playing the WTO card. China filed complaints with the World Trade Organization, challenging the legality of the U.S. tariffs. This was a way to fight back within the established rules-based system, even if the process was slow and cumbersome. Diversification, the long game. China also started looking for alternative trading partners, diversifying its imports and reducing its reliance on the U.S. This was a long-term strategy, a way to de-risk its economy and lessen its vulnerability to American pressure. It was like building a second ballroom, just in case the first one became too chaotic. The trade love-hate story of Uncle Sam and Brother Dragon, a tariff tango. Uncle Sam feels the pinch. The music was loud, the dance was furious, and Uncle Sam was starting to feel a bit sore. The tariff tango wasn't just a show of strength. It had real consequences, and some of them were hitting Uncle Sam right where it hurt, in his wallet and in his pride. The bill comes due. GDP and jobs. Take a hit. Remember that apple pie Uncle Sam was enjoying? Well, the ingredients got a little more expensive, and so did a lot of other things. The trade war, while intended to punish Brother Dragon, ended up having a significant impact on Uncle Sam's own economy. The GDP stumble. Economists, those folks with the complicated charts and formulas, started crunching the numbers. Their estimates varied, but the general consensus was that the trade war had shaved a bit off Uncle Sam's economic growth, somewhere between 0.2% and 0.4% of GDP. That might not sound like much, but in a multi-trillion-dollar economy, it's a lot of apple pies. It's the difference between a brisk walk and a slightly slower stroll, but it's still a slowdown. The job jitters. The trade war also cost jobs. Moody's Analytics, a well-respected economic research firm, estimated that the trade war led to the loss of nearly 300,000 jobs in the U.S. That's a lot of people who were hoping to dance their way to prosperity, but instead found themselves out of step. The job losses weren't evenly distributed, with some sectors like manufacturing and agriculture feeling the pain more than others. The price tag, inflation, and the consumer squeeze. Those tariffs Uncle Sam slapped on Brother Dragon's goods, they didn't just magically disappear. They ended up being paid mostly by American consumers. Higher prices. Think of tariffs as a tax on imports. When those goods enter the US, someone has to pay that tax. Often, it's the importer, who then passes the cost on to the consumer in the form of higher prices. So that new TV, that new phone, that new pair of shoes, they all got a little bit more expensive. Inflation creep. The overall effect on inflation was relatively small, but noticeable. Estimates range from a 0.1% to 0.9% increase. Again, that might not sound like much, but it adds up. It's like a slow leak in your tire. It might not be a blowout, but it's definitely deflating your purchasing power. It meant Uncle Sam's dollar didn't stretch quite as far as it used to. Sectoral shuffle. Winners and losers, mostly losers. The trade war didn't hit everyone equally. Some sectors got trampled, while others managed to sidestep the worst of it. Agriculture. The soybean saga. American farmers, particularly soybean growers, got hammered. China, a major buyer of US soybeans, retaliated with tariffs that effectively closed off that market. Farmers were left with mountains of unsold soybeans, and prices plummeted. This was a direct hit to a key part of Uncle Sam's economic and political landscape. The American Farm Bureau estimated the damage to agricultural exports at over $27 billion. That's a lot of tractors and combines. Manufacturing mixed signals. The trade war was supposed to help American manufacturers, but the reality was more complicated. Tariffs on steel and aluminum, intended to protect those industries, actually raised costs for other manufacturers who used those materials. Some manufacturers benefited from reduced competition from Chinese imports, but others suffered from supply chain disruptions and higher input costs. It was a mixed bag, with some winners, but more losers. Technology. The high-stakes game. The tech sector was caught in the crossfire, facing both tariffs and restrictions on technology exports to China. This disrupted supply chains, increased costs, and created uncertainty about the future. The battle for technological dominance was a key driver of the trade war, and the tech sector was on the front lines. Export exodus. Losing ground in China, American exporters, who had been hoping to tap into the vast Chinese market, found themselves facing closed doors and higher tariffs. Exports to China declined significantly as Brother Dragon found other sources for the goods he needed. This was a major setback for Uncle Sam's ambition to sell more made-in-America products to the world. The trade diversion dance. While the US and China were locked in their tariff tango, other countries were watching from the sidelines, and some even saw an opportunity. The trade war led to a shift in global trade patterns, with some countries benefiting from the diversion of trade away from the US and China. It was like a game of musical chairs. When the music stopped, some players were left without a seat, while others found themselves in a better position. Vietnam, Mexico, and other countries saw an increase in exports as companies sought alternative sourcing. The bottom line? Economic pain, political gain. The trade war inflicted measurable economic pain on the United States, while the overall impact on GDP and employment might have been relatively modest. The costs were real, and they were unevenly distributed. Consumers paid higher prices, farmers lost export markets, and many businesses faced increased costs and uncertainty. The question is, was the economic pain worth it? That depends on who you ask. Trump and his supporters would argue that the trade war was necessary to force China to change its behavior and to level the playing field for American businesses. Critics would argue that the costs outweighed the benefits and that there were better ways to address the legitimate concerns about China's trade practices. The tariff tango might have been a bold move, but it was also a risky one, and the jury is still out on whether it ultimately benefited Uncle Sam. The dance left some bruises, and the question remained, was it worth it? The trade love-hate. Story of Uncle Sam and Brother Dragon, a tariff tango. Brother Dragon stumbles but doesn't fall. While Uncle Sam was feeling the pinch from his own self-inflicted and China-inflicted tariff wounds, Brother Dragon wasn't exactly waltzing through the trade war unscathed. He might have been a skilled dancer, but those punches from Uncle Sam, even if sometimes misdirected, still packed a wallop. The economic headwinds, slower growth, but still growing China's economy, the mighty engine of global growth, didn't grind to a halt, but it did sputter a bit. Growth slowdown. The trade war added to existing headwinds facing the Chinese economy, including a slowing domestic property market and government efforts to rein in debt. While China's growth rate remained positive, it did slow down during the peak of the trade war. Think of it like Brother Dragon running a marathon. He was still running, but he wasn't setting any new personal records. He was feeling the burn. Quantifying the exact impact is tricky, as many factors influence growth, but the consensus is that there was a noticeable slowdown. The export engine coughs. China's export machine, the engine that had powered its remarkable economic rise, started to cough and sputter, reduced exports to the US. The US tariffs made Chinese goods more expensive for American consumers, leading to a drop in demand. Studies showed a significant decline in Chinese exports to the US, ranging from 8.5% to over 26%. That's a big chunk of business lost. It's like having your best customer suddenly decide to shop somewhere else. Profit squeeze. Chinese exporters faced a double whammy: lower demand and higher costs due to the tariffs. This squeezed their profit margins. One study estimated an average reduction in export profit margins of 0.35 percentage points. While that might sound small, it adds up when you're talking about billions of dollars in trade. Job losses? Maybe. One study found a 1.62% decrease in the number of workers in the traded goods industries. Brother Dragon's counter moves. The art of adaptation. Brother Dragon wasn't just going to sit back and take the punches. He's a resourceful and resilient character, and he had a few tricks up his sleeve. He used his own policy tools and took a longer view. Diversification, diversification, diversification. Brother Dragon started looking for new dance partners. He doubled down on efforts to expand trade with other countries, particularly through the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, his ambitious infrastructure and investment project spanning Asia, Africa, and Europe. It was like saying, if Uncle Sam doesn't want to dance, I'll find someone else who does. Boosting domestic demand. China also focused on stimulating its own domestic market. The government encouraged consumer spending and invested in infrastructure projects to offset the decline in exports. It was like turning up the music at home to drown out the noise from the trade war. The technology push, the trade war, and particularly the restrictions on Huawei and other tech companies, accelerated China's drive for technological self-reliance. The government poured money into research and development, aiming to reduce its dependence on American technology. It was like saying, "If you won't sell me your dancing shoes, I'll make my own." Import substitution too. Brother Dragon also sought new sources of imports to replace goods previously purchased from the US. The bottom line: resilience and rebalancing. The trade war undoubtedly hurt the Chinese economy, particularly its export sector. But China's size, its diversified economy, and its government's ability to intervene in the market helped to cushion the blow. The tariff tango forced Brother Dragon to adapt, to accelerate his efforts to rebalance his economy away from excessive reliance on exports and towards domestic consumption and technological self-sufficiency. The dance, in other words, might have been painful, but it also prompted Brother Dragon to learn some new moves that might make him an even more formidable competitor in the long run. The music changed, but Brother Dragon kept dancing, albeit to a slightly different beat. The long-term effects are still playing out, but one clear result is a push toward greater self-reliance. Okay, let's zoom out and look at the global consequences of the tariff tango, continuing our established narrative style. The trade love-hate story of Uncle Sam and Brother Dragon, a tariff tango, the ripple effect, and the bystander boogie. The tariff tango between Uncle Sam and Brother Dragon wasn't just a private dance. It was a performance on a global stage, and the vibrations from their stomping feet were felt far and wide. It was like a two-person mosh pit in the middle of a crowded ballroom. Everyone else had to adjust, dodge, or risk getting trampled. The global trade shuffle, a surprise uptick, sort of. You might think that a trade war between the world's two largest economies would lead to a decrease in global trade. But surprisingly, some studies showed an increase in overall trade volume, even as trade between the US and China declined. How is that possible? It's all about the rerouting of trade flows, the bystander boogie. While Uncle Sam and Brother Dragon were busy throwing punches and tariffs, other countries saw an opportunity. They started doing the bystander boogie, stepping in to fill the gaps left by the feuding giants. It was like a game of musical chairs. When the US stopped buying as much from China, other countries started selling more to the US. And when China stopped buying as much from the US, other countries started selling more to China. The winner's circle. Vietnam, Mexico, and certain countries became the unexpected beneficiaries of the trade war. They were like the wallflowers at the dance who suddenly found themselves in the spotlight. Vietnam, this Southeast Asian nation, saw a surge in exports, particularly to the US. Companies looking for alternatives to Chinese manufacturing started shifting production to Vietnam. It was like Vietnam won the trade war lottery. Mexico, our neighbor to the south, also benefited, increasing its exports to the US, particularly in sectors like automobiles and electronics. The USMCA, the revamped NAFTA, despite being negotiated under the shadow of the trade war, further facilitated this shift. Taiwan, this island already a major player in the tech industry, saw increased demand for its products as companies sought to diversify their supply chains away from mainland China. Others, many more nations, benefited as well. The ripple effect, everyone feels it. The trade war wasn't just about the US and China. It had ripple effects across the entire global economy. The EU, Canada, and Mexico, these major trading partners of the US, found themselves caught in the crossfire. They faced retaliatory tariffs from both the US and China, and the overall uncertainty created by the trade war dampened economic growth. It was like being caught in a food fight. Even if you weren't the target, you could still end up with mashed potatoes in your hair. The steel and aluminum saga. Remember those Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum? They were aimed at everyone, not just China. This caused friction with US allies like Canada, Mexico, and the EU, who retaliated with their own tariffs on American goods. It was a trade war on multiple fronts, and it strained relationships with some of America's closest trading partners. The rise of the protectionist wall. Beyond the immediate economic impacts, the trade war contributed to a broader trend, a rise in protectionism and a growing sense of uncertainty in the global trading environment. The WTO under siege. The Trump administration's disdain for the World Trade Organization, WTO, and its willingness to bypass its rules undermined the institution that had been the cornerstone of the global trading system for decades. It was like trying to play a game without a referee. Everyone starts making up their own rules. The uncertainty factor. Businesses hate uncertainty. The trade war, with its unpredictable twists and turns, made it difficult for companies to plan, invest, and make long-term decisions. It was like trying to build a house on quicksand. A fragmentation trend. The tariff tango, alongside other geopolitical events, contributed to the sense that the world was becoming more fragmented, with countries increasingly turning inward and prioritizing national interests over global cooperation. The bottom line, a messy dance with global consequences. The US-China trade war was more than just a bilateral dispute. It was a global event with far-reaching consequences. It reshaped trade flows, boosted some economies while hurting others, and contributed to a more uncertain and protectionist global environment. It was a messy dance, a chaotic performance that left the audience, the rest of the world, wondering what the next act would bring. While some bystanders found opportunity, the overall impact on the global economy was disruptive and destabilizing. The music might have changed, and some new dancers joined the floor, but the underlying tensions remained, casting a long shadow over the future of global trade. The biggest takeaway: when the two biggest economies start a fight, everyone feels, okay, let's conclude our narrative by exploring the long-term consequences and expert opinions, maintaining our established style. The trade love-hate story of Uncle Sam and Brother Dragon, a tariff tango, the morning after and beyond. The music has stopped. The dance floor is littered with broken glass and trampled confetti, and the dancers have limped off to their respective corners. But the tariff tango between Uncle Sam and Brother Dragon wasn't just a one-night affair. It left a lasting impact, like a hangover that just won't quit. The relationship hangover, trust issues and strategic rivalry. The trade war wasn't just about economics, it was about trust, or rather, the lack thereof. The years of escalating tensions, accusations and retaliatory measures have deeply damaged the relationship between the US and China. Increased mistrust. The trade war solidified a narrative of suspicion and rivalry. Uncle Sam sees Brother Dragon as a strategic competitor who doesn't play fair, and Brother Dragon sees Uncle Sam as a declining power trying to contain China's rise. This mutual mistrust makes it difficult to cooperate on other issues, from climate change to global health. It is hard to cooperate with someone you distrust, and harder to trust someone who has punched you. Strategic competition. The trade war accelerated the shift towards a more competitive and confrontational relationship. The focus is no longer just on trade. It's about technological dominance, military power, and global influence. The two countries are now locked in a long-term strategic rivalry, a new kind of Cold War, but with economic and technological competition at its core. The WTO under fire, a rules-based order in question, the World Trade Organization, WTO, the referee of global trade, took a beating during the trade war, bypassing the rules. The Trump administration's unilateral use of tariffs, particularly under Section 301 and IEEPA, undermined the WTO's dispute resolution mechanism. It was like ignoring the referee and making up your own rules. China's retaliation, while understandable, also contributed to the erosion of the rules-based system. Weakening the institution. The U.S. also blocked appointments to the WTO's appellate body, effectively paralyzing its ability to resolve trade disputes. This was a deliberate attempt to weaken the institution, reflecting a broader skepticism about multilateralism. The future of global trade. The trade war raised fundamental questions about the future of the global trading system. Can the WTO be reformed to address the challenges of the 21st century, or will it become increasingly irrelevant? Will the world move towards a more fragmented system, with competing trade blocs and regional agreements? Expert opinions. The economist's way. Economists and trade policy experts have been busy analyzing the trade war, and their verdict is generally not a positive one. Negative economic consequences. Most economists agree that the trade war had negative economic consequences, both for the US and China, and for the global economy as a whole. Higher prices for consumers, disrupted supply chains, reduced investment, and slower economic growth were the common themes. Undermining the global trading system. Experts also warned about the long-term damage to the global trading system, the erosion of trust. The weakening of the WTO and the rise of protectionism were seen as major threats to global prosperity. Lose-lose scenario. Many experts concluded that this was a lose-lose proposition, in that the economic damage done to both parties outweighed any perceived benefits. The decoupling dilemma. A more fragmented world. The trade war accelerated a trend that was already underway, a gradual decoupling of the US and Chinese economies. Supply chain shifts. Companies started to rethink their reliance on China as a single source of supply. They began to diversify their operations, moving production to other countries like Vietnam, Mexico, and India. This is a slow and complex process, but the trade war gave it a significant push. De-risking became the new corporate buzzword. Technological divide. The battle for technological dominance is a key driver of the decoupling trend. The US is trying to restrict China's access to advanced technologies, and China is striving for technological self-reliance. This could lead to a world with two separate and incompatible technological ecosystems. A more fragmented globe. The trade war, combined with other geopolitical tensions, is contributing to a more fragmented and polarized world. Countries are increasingly choosing sides, aligning themselves with either the US or China. This could lead to a less stable and less prosperous global economy. The final curtain? Not likely. The tariff tango between Uncle Sam and Brother Dragon is unlikely to end anytime soon. The underlying tensions and strategic rivalry are too deep-seated. While there may be periods of relative calm, the potential for future conflicts remains high. The dance may change its steps, the music may shift, but the fundamental dynamic, a competition for global power and influence, will continue. The world will be watching, hoping that the dancers can find a way to avoid stepping on each other's toes, and more importantly, avoid causing a global economic stumble. The questions posed throughout this story remain unanswered and form the core of international relations for the foreseeable future. Uncle Sam and Brother Dragon. Once partners in a global economic dance, now locked in a, well, let's call it a tariff tango. Less Fred and Ginger, more competitive ballroom brawling. It started with a grumble, that growing trade deficit, and escalated into a full-blown trade war. Tariffs flew like punches, hitting everything from soybeans to semiconductors. Accusations of foul play, stolen moves, and unfair advantages filled the air. The world watched, some cheering, some cringing. The WTO, the global trade referee, seemed powerless. Other countries scrambled to adapt, some even finding opportunity in the chaos. But this wasn't just about numbers, it was about people. Farmers, factory workers, consumers. Everyone felt the ripple effects. Trust eroded, supply chains shifted, and the future of global trade, well, it became a lot more uncertain. The dance goes on even if the music has changed. The questions remain. Can these two giants find a new rhythm? Will the global economy recover its footing? And what lessons have we learned from this epic clash? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments, like this video if you want to see more breakdowns of global events, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in this ongoing saga, because understanding the dance is key to navigating the future